Have you ever stopped to think about, well, reading and writing? I mean, really think about them. There's these things we do every single day, mostly without a second thought, like breathing almost. But they're fundamental linguistic skills, right up there with listening and speaking, shaping how we process, well, everything. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the really fascinating world of written discourse and reading theory. We've looked at a bunch of research to sort of unpack how our brains actually handle written language, how we make it, and how we understand it. Hopefully, it gives you a fresh perspective on these every day, but incredibly complex actions.
Absolutely. And, understanding this stuff isn't just for linguists or teachers figuring out lesson plans. It's really for anyone who wants to get a better handle on how knowledge gets shaped, how it gets passed around in written form. It's sort of like pulling back the curtain on how we actually build understanding from text.
Okay, good starting point. So let's begin with something that often gets mixed up, the difference between text and discourse. We tend to use them almost interchangeably, don't we? But the sources we looked at draw a pretty useful line.
Yeah, that's a really crucial distinction for this discussion, the way we're defining it here. Think of text as the thing itself. It's any piece of written speech, long or short, that could mean something. The words on the page, basically. Or screen. A sign, an email, a book, that's the text, the what. Discourse, though, that's a bit different. It's about coherence. It includes written or spoken language where the pieces actually hang together and make sense in context. It's more about the how and why, the meaning being made as the words connect and interact. It's kind of like the difference between just the musical notes written down and the actual performance.
Oh, I like that. The score versus the performance. That makes sense. And that kind of sets us up perfectly to talk about the big differences between speaking and writing. You might think they're just, two sides of the same coin, but they're fundamentally distinct, aren't they?
They really are, drastically so. When you think about speech, it's ephemeral, right? It's there and then it's gone. Poof. You can't, rewind a live conversation easily. It happens linearly in time. You process it right then online. And because of that, it's often spontaneous. Plus, you usually share the context with who you're talking to. And things like emphasis or emotion, that comes across through your tone, your intonation. Now, writing.
Okay.
Writing is permanent, sticks around. It's not tied to a specific moment. You can read it whenever. That lets you process it offline, take your time. And it's usually worked, drafted, revised, polished. It's a final product. The context often isn't shared. The writer might have no idea who will read it or when, so you have to be way more explicit. And those pragmatic things like tone, you have to signal them differently using punctuation, maybe bold text, paragraph breaks.
Right. So the big takeaway here is pretty profound, actually. Speech is something we just kind of pick up naturally through exposure. But reading and writing, they demand something else entirely. They need formal training, conscious effort. The brain has to learn completely new tricks, a different mindset. Okay, so with that groundwork laid, let's zoom in on reading itself. It's incredibly sophisticated when you think about it. How does the brain actually turn those little marks on a page into meaning? Our sources talk about low-level and high-level processes.
That's right. So the low-level process is basically the decoding part. It's about recognizing the symbols, the letters, the words themselves, and identifying what they are. Then you have the high-level process. That's the comprehension side. Understanding the whole text, connecting it to what you already know, figuring out the meaning. The real magic happens when these two levels work together effectively. Now, how they work together, that's where you get different theories, different models of reading. There are three main ones. The first is the bottom-up model. This basically says information flows just one way. From the letters up to the words, then sentences, then the whole text, meaning no feedback. You just decode piece by piece until you get the whole picture. Then there's the top-down model. This flips it around, sort of. It suggests that your existing knowledge stuff stored in your long-term memory, your LTM, strongly influences how you process the lower-level stuff. So you use your background knowledge to make predictions, to form hypotheses about the text as you read. It helps you anticipate things. And finally, the one that's most accepted today is the interactive model. This model says, look, both bottom-up and top-down processes happen at the same time. They run in parallel, and they're constantly talking to each other, influencing each other. Which process takes the lead might depend on, say, how difficult the text is or how much you already know about the topic. A key point here is you can do low-level processing without high-level, you can sound out words you don't understand, but you absolutely cannot get high-level comprehension without that low-level foundation. They're linked.
That makes sense. It's not one or the other, but both working together. So if they're running in parallel, what's happening right down at the nuts and bolts level when your eyes hit just one single word?
Right. This leads us to a really well-established idea called the dual route model. It explains how we process a single written word. Basically, once your eyes see the letters, your brain kicks off two routes simultaneously. One is the phonological route. This route converts the letters into sounds, into phonemes. It's like sounding the word out in your head based on the rules of the language. And at the very same instant, the lexical route fires up. This route is more like a direct lookup. It takes the visual form of the word and searches for it in your mental dictionary, your lexicon, stored in long-term memory. It connects the written word directly to its meaning. So these two routes work together. They let you understand the word, and if you need to, say it out loud. This explains why you recognize familiar words instantly, that's the lexical route, but you can still tackle new words by sounding them out using the phonological route. It's very efficient.
Wow, okay. Dual routes running at the same time. That's pretty amazing. And it really feeds into how reading and writing develop together, doesn't it? They're not separate skills learned in isolation. I was thinking about little kids who seem to read logos, like on their cereal box, way before they know the alphabet. Frith's theory helps explain that, right? And how things progress from there.
Exactly. Fritz's model from 1985 is great for showing this back and forth, this reciprocal relationship. The arrows in her model are key. They show how progress in one skill influences the other. So it starts with stage 1A. You've got logographic reading, that's the cereal box example. The child links a familiar visual symbol logo with the sound or meaning, but not with individual letters. At the same time, their writing is symbolic writing. They might just scribble something vaguely associated with it, not real letters, just a random visual link. Then, in stage 1B, reading practice influences writing. This is logographic writing. The child starts trying to imitate or draw the shape of the words they recognize logographically. Still not letter-based, really. Okay, then stage 2A marks a big shift, driven by writing practice. This is alphabetic writing. By trying to write, learners start seeing words as made of individual letters. They begin deconstructing them. This cognitive shift lets them start combining letters to make new words, mapping sounds to symbols. But interestingly, their reading might still be largely logographic at this point, even as the writing becomes more alphabetic.
So writing can actually pull reading along in that stage.
Yes, precisely. Which leads to stage 2B, which is alphabetic reading. That practice in alphabetic writing helps them crack the code for reading words alphabetically, connecting letters to sounds across the whole word, not just recognizing shapes.
Okay, got it.
Then we move to stage 3A. Here, orthographic reading develops. Alphabetic reading gets consolidated, becomes more automatic. Learners start picking up on spelling patterns, visual chunks of words, and even rules for things like intonation suggested by punctuation. Meanwhile, alphabetic writing continues, but orthographic writing mastering all the conventions like punctuation, capitalization, paragraphing that takes much longer, it lags behind orthographic reading. And finally, stage 3B, orthographic writing, is where it all comes together. Mastery of writing with all its complexities usually comes after a lot of training in both reading and writing, often stretching right through school into adolescence.
It really is a long journey. And listening to that, it makes sense why spelling errors are so common along the way. Yeah. It's almost reassuring, We've all been there, writing friend instead of friend. It's part of the process. But when those errors happen, especially for learners, what kind of mistakes are typical and what's the best way to address them based on this?
That's a really practical point. The sources identify several common types of errors, and they're often not just carelessness. You see insertion, like adding extra letters, until for until, or omission, leaving letters out, which for which. Also substitution, beach for beach, maybe mixing up similar looking or sounding letters, and transposition, where letters get swapped like your friend example. Another interesting one is grapheme substitution. This is where learners spell based on sound rules, sometimes ignoring exceptions or silent letters. Think parliament for parliament, or maybe taught for taught. Often these pop up due to, well, unconscious processing or maybe interference from their first language's sound spelling rules. And in terms of correction, the research suggests that just drilling abstract spelling rules isn't always the most effective way. Instead, reinforcing that lexical route we talked about through visual exercises, getting learners to really see and remember the correct visual form of tricky words tends to stick better long term. It builds a stronger visual memory for the word itself.
That makes a lot of sense, focusing on the visual pattern, not just the rule. Shifting gears slightly, but related to this. We probably read way more often than we write in daily life, right? So let's think about why we read, if you had to boil it down.
Well, the main reasons usually fall into 3 buckets. First, pleasure or entertainment. Reading a novel, a magazine, just for enjoyment. Second, work or professional reasons. That includes studying, reading reports, research articles, emails for your job. And third, ordinary daily tasks. Things like reading recipes, instructions, signs, menus, text messages. Just navigating the world.
Okay, yeah, that covers most situations. But thinking about those different reasons, does it mean we read differently depending on the purpose? Like, reading a contract feels totally different from relaxing with a novel. Are we using different gears mentally?
Oh, absolutely. We definitely adapt our reading strategies. There's a key distinction between intensive reading and extensive reading. Intensive reading is that close, careful reading, like your contract example, or analyzing a text for specific information, maybe focusing on language details. Accuracy and speed might be important. Extensive reading is more relaxed, usually for pleasure or getting a general understanding. Reading longer texts, like novels where you're immersed in the flow and don't necessarily stop for every unknown word. Good teachers try to incorporate both so reading doesn't just feel like a chore. Beyond that, we use specific techniques too, like skimming quickly, running your eyes over a text to get the main idea, the gist, or scanning where you're looking for a specific piece of information, like a name or a date, and you ignore everything else until you find it. And then there's a huge amount of unaware reading. Just reading things incidentally throughout the day, table of contents, notifications on your phone, street signs, menus on a computer. You're reading, but you're not consciously thinking, I am reading now. Experienced readers switch between these modes pretty seamlessly, often without even realizing it.
It's amazing how dynamic it is. Okay, let's flip the coin now and talk about the active side. Writing is this incredible process of taking thoughts and turning them into language, but with much stricter rules than speaking, right? Rules we have to learn.
Definitely. Writing is a real linguistic workout. Unlike speech, you don't have your body language, your tone of voice, pitch changes to help convey meaning. But the huge advantage is you can revise it. You can go back, tweak it, polish it, and actually mastering writing forces you to really understand how language works internally. It's often a process of discovery, figuring things out as you go.
And the reasons we write are just as varied as why we read, aren't they? Everything from a quick shopping list to, I don't know, crafting a novel.
Exactly. And to capture that variety, our sources suggest looking at texts through several lenses, based on work by Steen from 1999. These attributes help define the writing task. There's the domain, is it scientific, artistic, journalistic? The medium, how is it presented? Print, digital, handwritten. The content, what's the actual topic? The form, the genre, like an essay, a poem, a report. The function, is it trying to inform, persuade, entertain? The rhetorical style, like narration, description, argument. And finally, the language itself. The style, register, the specific word choices. All these factors shape how you approach the writing.
That's a lot to juggle.
Yeah.
When you actually sit down to write, the process itself isn't just putting words down, right? There are distinct phases: planning, formulation, revision.
Right.
Let's unpack this because it sounds like it's not just step one, step two, step three.
Not at all. That's the crucial thing. It's highly iterative, not linear. Planning is the first phase, theoretically. This is where you think about all those text attributes we just mentioned. What am I going to say? Content. Why am I writing this? Purpose. Who am I writing for? Audience. What kind of language should I use? Form, linguistic resources, grammar, vocab. How should I structure it? Organization, coherence, cohesion, even orthography. Then comes formulation. This is the actual act of putting words down, drafting the text. And this is key, it constantly overlaps with planning. As you write, you might rethink your plan, you check what you've written, maybe you redo sentences or paragraphs. It's messy. And then there's revision. This isn't just proofreading at the end, though that's part of it. Revision has two main goals. One is a global review. Did I achieve my purpose? Does it make sense? Is the style right? Does it meet the audience's needs? The other goal is looking for specific mistakes, grammar, spelling, punctuation. But again, you don't just revise at the very end. Writers are constantly revising sentences, paragraphs, even rethinking the whole plan during formulation. You jump back and forth between these phases. So yeah, encouraging that kind of problem-solving approach where writing is seen as a challenge to communicate effectively, often requiring multiple passes, is really important for teaching.
That recursive, messy reality of writing, it definitely resonates. And thinking about teaching, all of this has clear implications for learning a foreign language too, doesn't it?
It really does. While the basic stages of acquisition, like Frith's model, apply broadly, there are specific considerations for L2 learners. For instance, that alphabetic phase connecting letters to sounds is generally easier in your first language. You already have a huge amount of implicit phonological knowledge. You know the common sounds and words. So, our source gives a concrete example. Imagine teaching English writing to young Spanish speakers. The teacher should ideally be aware of where those students are in developing their Spanish alphabetic skills. The recommendation is actually to hold off on intensive English writing until the Spanish alphabetic stage is reasonably solid. Why? To avoid interference, to let them build that foundational letter sound understanding securely in their L1 first. It prevents confusion and sets them up better for L2 writing later.
That makes sense, avoiding that cognitive overload.
Exactly, and this ties back into phonological knowledge again, that ability to hear and manipulate the sounds within words. It's fundamental for literacy. We often talk about syllables and phones, but there are also these units called onset and rhyme. The onset is the first consonant sound or blend in a syllable, like the C in cat, and the rhyme is the vowel and everything after it, the addit in cat. Think rhyming words often share a rhyme. Working with syllables, and especially onset rhyme units, can be more intuitive and helpful for learners, particularly early on, than trying to isolate tiny individual phonemes, which can be abstract. For example, English syllable division can be tricky for learners from other language backgrounds. A Spanish speaker might naturally break careful into careful based on Spanish patterns, which differs from the English careful. So focusing on these larger sound chunks like onset rhyme helps learners connect spoken sounds to written spelling patterns more easily. It builds that bridge, which is crucial before tackling complex writing tasks.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground today, really diving deep into reading and writing. It's incredible how complex these processes are, how interconnected everything is, from recognizing a single letter to structuring a whole argument, things we mostly do without thinking.
It really is remarkable. And if you connect all these pieces, you see that every single word you read, every sentence you manage to write down, it's all part of this incredibly intricate cognitive dance happening inside your head. So maybe a final thought for you listening is this. The next time you pick up something to read, or even just jot down a quick note, maybe pause for a second. What new aspect of that intricate linguistic dance can you notice now? What layer of your own amazing cognitive ability might you discover?